First, I'd like to mark a critical moment in our province's battle against the pandemic with the announcement of Alberta's RELAUNCH strategy. This is our plan, developed on the advice of public health officials, for carefully and gradually lifting the restrictions imposed on our economy and on our lives. It feels like a lot more than 56 days since the first presumptive case of the novel coronavirus was reported here in Alberta on March the 5th. But together, Albertans have responded to the worst global pandemic in over a century with a great deal of common sense, but also making tremendous sacrifices and demonstrating great resilience. Your efforts have succeeded in containing the spread of the virus far below the devastating scale of the outbreak in many other places, and well below the capacity of our healthcare system to cope. The losses have been hard, and there will, without a doubt, be more to come. And we'll be remembering and grieving the toll of the pandemic for the rest of our lives. As I said before, I won't sugarcoat reality. The truth is, we still face the most severe economic conditions since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it will take heroic effort and determination to get Alberta working and growing again. But with today's launch of Alberta's RELAUNCH strategy, we can finally begin to shift our focus from the pain and anxiety of the past few weeks and to start looking with modest hope and cautious confidence towards the future. Now, we're still months from anything that will feel like the normal lives that we all took for granted just a few weeks back. But as we begin to look to a new future, I'd like to thank you for your strength and adaptability, which has allowed our province to respond so effectively. Our success has been built on a sound pandemic response plan, implemented by Dr. Hinshaw and the team at Alberta Health and AHS, many of whom saw COVID-19 coming before many others did. They prepared by assembling the best stockpile of medical supplies in Canada and, as importantly, by quickly implementing a testing regime more aggressive than in any other province in Canada and among the very best in the world. That's one of the reasons we have by far the lowest relative number of hospitalized COVID-19 patients amongst Canada's largest provinces. We have 90 COVID-19 patients receiving hospital care today, only about 5% of the 1,900 acute care beds that we have currently set aside for the pandemic, and more to be added as we approach the projected peak. 18 COVID-19 patients are currently using ventilators. That's about 3% of the 689 ventilators currently available in Alberta hospitals for COVID patients. And as we demonstrated in our updated modeling presentation earlier this week, our low, probable, and elevated scenarios for the pandemic have us well below the maximum capacity of our health system to cope at the projected peak now and in the future. In fact, much lower than the projected peak 2 to 3 weeks from now. And we have now stockpiled weeks' worth of personal protective equipment for our healthcare workers. So while we continue to see new cases and expect to, as long as the virus is around, we've achieved our primary goal of flattening the curve of infections to keep our healthcare system from being overwhelmed. We've also made our own prudent decisions about how to control the pandemic while minimizing the impact of these measures on our economy. For example, where we moved to prohibit public gatherings to under 15 people, in Ontario the limit has been 5, and Quebec banned gatherings completely. Here in Alberta, we did not impose full lockdowns of an entire region, whereas in Quebec, for example, they locked down 10 entire regions. And of course, many European countries and U.S. states have had far more stringent restrictions in place. Now, where some other provinces closed down their manufacturing and construction sectors, here in Alberta, we kept them and other critical industries like the energy industry open and operating, of course with appropriate precautions over the past couple of months. So because we did not overreact, only 15% of businesses had to close entirely because of the public health orders, representing about 12% of the workforce and I believe about 4% of our provincial economy. Now, I don't say these things to minimize in any way the impact on the tens of thousands of Albertans whose livelihoods have been seriously affected. Their sacrifices, their suffering are real, and we will not stop until we're able to get all of them back to work. But thanks to the prudent choices that Albertans have made, we are in a strong place, and we are learning gradually what works as we move to reopen other business sectors and public activities across the province. Our challenge now is to begin returning to a more normal life. A full return to normal won't come until there's an effective vaccine or treatment, or until the virus is no longer there to threaten us. But until then, we'll all have to remain vigilant. We'll have to continue to practice the personal distancing and hygiene habits that we've all learned to adapt to over the past couple of months. And between now and then, we'll apply the scientific knowledge that is being learned about COVID-19. And we can continue to learn from the practical experiences and successes of other societies, like, for example, South Korea and Taiwan, who have adapted to the threat while keeping most of their economies and social activities functioning. Today's announcement marks the start of a carefully controlled and staged approach to safely reopening Alberta's economy and society and getting Albertans back to work. The full relaunch strategy will allow for the gradual reopening of businesses, services, and recreational opportunities as they're able to reopen under new health guidelines. Each stage will be evaluated and sequenced to ensure public safety is protected while meeting the needs of people, businesses, and to protect against potential future surges in transmission of COVID-19. As we begin to reopen, several safeguards will be in place to protect Albertans, and those safeguards include increasing our COVID-19 testing capacity, which continues to lead the world, robust and comprehensive contact tracing, aided by technology, to quickly notify people who may have been exposed, support for those who have tested positive for COVID-19, to enable isolation and effectively to contain the spread, stronger border controls and airport screening, especially for international travelers, rules and guidance for the use of masks in crowded spaces, especially in areas like mass transit, for example, and maintaining strong protections for the most vulnerable, especially the elderly in long-term care facilities. We have a rapid response plan to deal with future local outbreaks of COVID-19, which was outlined by Dr. Hinshaw yesterday. We can expect to see future local outbreaks, but with more and faster testing in place, increased testing of close contacts, and better public awareness of health guidelines, we're in a position to identify those outbreaks and contain them before they spread and strain our healthcare system. Our plan also includes making testing even more widely available, including testing those in settings that don't have, those people who don't have symptoms, and providing temporary housing for isolation or other needed supports for anyone who's at risk. And in every stage of our relaunch, Albertans will need to continue practicing careful personal hygiene, like washing hands frequently. We'll still need to follow physical distancing requirements of about 2 meters, and we'll all need to stay home if we show symptoms of the virus, such as cough, fever, shortness of breath, runny nose, or sore throat. So no more just toughing it out at work when we're sick. At the first sign of these symptoms, please stay home, take the online diagnostic test, and get tested if that is recommended. The successes of our relaunch depends on each of us looking out for ourselves and for our health system first. In doing so, we're also taking care of each other. The relaunch stages will also include an evaluation and monitoring period to determine if restrictions should be adjusted up or down. Triggers that will inform future restrictions include hospitalizations and intensive care unit occupancy. Keeping the burden on our hospitals well within what our healthcare system can bear is key to our strategy. That is why we continue to increase our healthcare capacity by adding more hospital beds, more ICU beds, and more ventilators to make our system even more resilient. Once our government, in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, is satisfied that the necessary health measures are in place, we will move forward to the first stage of our relaunch strategy. We anticipate that some businesses and facilities will be able to open as early as May 14th. That will be stage one, and this is what it will look like. Retail businesses like clothing, furniture, and bookstores will be able to reopen, operating within new public health guidelines, addressing things like the number of customers and disinfecting protocols. Some personal services like hairstyling and barbershops will be able to reopen under strict health guidelines. More dental procedures, physiotherapy, chiropractic, optometry, and similar services will also be able to open under these strict healthcare guidelines. New public health rules tailored to specific types of business will also mean that we can reopen museums and art galleries, daycares with limits, restaurants, cafes, lounges, and bars if they can maintain social distancing, such as public seating at 50% capacity, and some additional outdoor recreation. Gatherings of more than 15 people will not be allowed for the time being, although we do expect that number to increase above 15 over time. And visits to patients at healthcare facilities will continue to be limited, although I do note that Dr. Hinshaw announced yesterday some clarification and more common sense provisions with respect to visits to the elderly to long-term care facilities. This also means that events that involved close physical contact, including art and culture festivals, major sporting events, and concerts will remain closed. Movie theaters, pools, recreation centers, arenas, spas, nightclubs, and gyms will remain closed for now. We'll also continue to recommend that all Albertans avoid non-essential travel and that they work from home when they can. And to prevent the spread of the virus, we'll ask Albertans to use masks in specified crowded spaces that don't allow for physical distancing, as I said before, like on mass transit. And on that point, I can inform Albertans that the Government of Alberta has ordered tens of millions of non-surgical masks, and we are developing a system for their distribution to help people to be able to use face coverings in crowded areas in the future. That program will be launched in a few weeks. As I said, if our situation remains stable for the next 2 weeks, we'll begin the first phase on May 14th. If we continue to keep the virus under control in that stage one, we will eventually progress to stage two, which will enable additional businesses and services to reopen and to resume operations with the 2-meter physical distancing requirement remaining in place with enhanced protection controls. This will include more scheduled surgeries, including backlog elimination. It will include personal services like artificial tanning, aesthetics, cosmetic, skin and body treatments, manicures, pedicures, waxing facial treatments, massage, and reflexology. Restaurants, cafes, lounges, and bars will continue to operate at that phase two, but at reduced capacity. Some larger gatherings will be permitted in some situations, with the number of people to be determined as we learn more about the levels of risk for different activities. Movie theaters will be able to open with restrictions, and summer camps will open, again, with restrictions. Visitors to patients at healthcare facilities will continue to be limited for obvious reasons. And nightclubs, gyms, pools, rec centers, and arenas will remain closed during stage two. Arts and culture festivals, concerts, attendance at major sporting events, and other mass gatherings will not be permitted in the second stage. And as in the first stage, we will continue recommending against non-essential travel. Stage three will ease restrictions even more. When we get there, we'll see, for example, reopening all businesses and services, obviously with some prudent public health restrictions, permitting larger gatherings with the number of people to be determined in the future. Arts and culture festivals, concert and major sporting events will be permitted, but with restrictions. Nightclubs, gyms, pools, rec centers, and arenas will reopen at that stage with some restrictions. And resuming industry conferences as well will be permitted with restrictions. although physical distancing restrictions will be maintained in all circumstances, but non-essential travel will no longer, be discouraged at that point. And by then, I think a lot of us are going to need a bit of a break anyway. Even before we start implementing the 3 formal stages of Alberta's relaunch strategy, I'm pleased to announce that we will immediately take action to lift the following restrictions. First of all, Alberta Health Services will resume some scheduled non-urgent surgeries as soon as Monday, May the 4th. Secondly, dental and other health providers will also be allowed to resume services starting Monday, May the 4th, as long as they follow COVID guidelines that are proposed by their professional colleges. Thirdly, Alberta's online campground reservation system will open for bookings on May 14th, and campsites will be gradually made available, although spaces will be limited to allow for appropriate distancing. Large group camping, shared cooking areas, and programming will continue to be closed for the foreseeable future. Vehicle access will be once again allowed in some of our provincial parks as early as this weekend, and some boat launches will also be opened this Friday, tomorrow. Private and municipal parks can also open as long as appropriate physical distancing restrictions are in place. Golf courses will be allowed to open as early as this weekend, weather and conditions permitting. However, clubhouses and pro shops will remain closed until stage 1, when other retail stores are able to open. I would remind outdoor enthusiasts that while there are no off-highway vehicle restrictions currently in place, we ask people to be responsible and will be monitoring closely should the risk for wildfires increase. For our relaunch strategy to succeed, Albertans must be confident in their ability to go out and visit these businesses and services safely. We'll all need to be comfortable going into stores and visiting restaurants, and workers need to be comfortable going to work. So I want Albertans to know that our public health officials are constantly reviewing and improving our public health guidelines to keep us safe as we begin to resume in economic and personal social activities. You can expect to see changes and clarifications to this plan as it unfolds. So it is not set in stone. It's going to be a plan that develops over time based on how well we're doing to combat the virus. This is a good thing, as we'll learn from the rapidly growing scientific literature and the experience of similar jurisdictions around Canada and the world. At all times, we'll be guided by the best and most up-to-date advice to ensure the safe operation of services and businesses. In every phase, there will be an evaluation and monitoring period to determine if we need to adjust restrictions up or down. In some cases, we may need to take a step forward. In others, we may have to take a step back. We have a world-class healthcare system with professionals who are working night and day to keep us safe and beat this virus, and will be closely watching hospitalization and intensive care unit occupancy rates. New confirmed cases, the percentage of positive results, and the rate of infection will be monitored to inform proactive responses in local areas right across the province. While restrictions are gradually eased across Alberta, an outbreak may mean some restrictions need to be temporarily strengthened in a local area. Throughout all stages of the relaunch strategy, the government will continue to do everything in its power to curb the spread of COVID-19. We can see the measures we've put in place are working. The vast majority of Albertans have demonstrated a tremendous level of both personal and civic responsibility in the face of something that we've never experienced before. I'm confident that we'll all move through the stages of this relaunch strategy with the same sense of unity and resilience that we've shown from the start of the pandemic. So I'd like to conclude by recalling that in my address 3 weeks ago, I reflected on how buffalo herd together during a fierce prairie storm, and they go into it head-on until it passes, a metaphor to illustrate how Albertans were dealing with the pandemic. Today, our situation has changed, and the threat has changed. Now our main focus must be on protecting the most vulnerable. Once again, the buffalo, that iconic symbol of life on the prairie for Indigenous people for millennia, provides a perfect metaphor for us. When stalked by wolves seeking to prey on the weak and injured, the buffalo again herd together to protect their own from the threat. Let the spirit and example of the sturdy prairie buffalo serve as our challenge and as our inspiration. COVID-19 will continue to threaten us for many months to come, but with care and with common sense, we'll be able to move steadily and safely through the stages of our relaunch strategy and begin the process of rebuilding our wonderful province together.